Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for this training session as part of our Becoming an Expert series with Leganto. You have probably noticed, but I am not Kevin Lane Cummings. He is actually out sick today, but I left his name on the slide here because he really did all of the work here to prepare the session for today. I'm Jessie Ransom. For those of you that I don't already know, I'm the Teaching and Learning Product Specialist working with Leganto. And what we'll be looking at today is the fifth in a series on becoming an expert. So today we'll be going through the purchasing workflows with Leganto, and we'll give you some suggestions for ways to work with Leganto for these, for your specific purchasing needs. As I said, this is the fifth in our series, so you can see the rest of them. If you've missed any of them, you can register for next month's session, which is going to be on actionable analytics. And you can do all of this at the same place where you found the registration for today's session, which is on the Ex Libris Knowledge Center within the Leganto training section. There's a webinars area. And Jenny, maybe you can add the link to this page at some point in the chat so that it's easy to get to. But the other thing that's really nice about this page is that you can also get the recordings and the PowerPoint presentations from all of the sessions in this series. So all of the ones up to now, we'll add the one from today. So there are points where the slides may include links to additional content or recordings for videos that you can watch. So this is a great resource for you. Here's what we're going to be covering today. So mostly we'll be talking about the purchase request workflow. How do instructors or other users make a request that the library purchase certain materials? How does the instructor request it, or how does the library request it? We'll talk about both manual and automatic purchase requests. I'll also talk about some of the issues that you may run into using the purchase request workflow and some of the solutions that other libraries have come up with to address those challenges. And then we'll also very briefly talk about Rialto and how that fits in. It's definitely not going to be the focus on this training session, but I will talk about it a little bit. So if Rialto is relevant to your institution, I'll point out a few additional resources for you to look at to learn more about that. Also, so that's kind of the purchase request workflow. In addition to that, I will also talk about some alternative options. So if you decide that the purchase request workflow is not a good fit for your institution, or if you've decided that long ago, I'll talk about some alternative options to the purchase request workflow, and then provide some additional resources at the end. So as I mentioned, you'll have access to the slides, so you'll be able to get to those additional resources after the session. I'll just point out too, we're specifically going to be talking about purchasing workflows related to Leganto, not Alma more generally. So I won't be going into the details about how to complete a purchase or working with PO lines or things like that. There are other training sessions where that is discussed. I'm really going to be focusing here on the integration between your Leganto data and the purchasing process. So that's really going to be the focus of today's session. So let's start with the overall workflow for purchase requests. And here I want to talk about kind of all of the different pieces of the overall purchase workflow or purchase request workflow. Again, we're going to start with purchase requests here. So I just kind of a heads up. I, as you know, talk about Leganto all the time. But there are pieces where the part of the workflow may take place in Leganto. Here I'm talking about the courses, the reading lists, the data that your instructors see. Part of the workflow is happening in Alma, where you are actually reviewing reading lists and making the purchase. I'm kind of separating these two pieces out to sort of the instructor side and the librarian or library workflows here. I know from myself that I tend to kind of talk about these somewhat interchangeably as well, because ultimately we're talking about the same data. You know, the data about what citations are used in reading lists is ALMA data and Leganto data. So, you know, if it seems like I'm talking about something in Leganto that you today do in ALMA, or, you know, vice versa, sorry. But I'm trying to separate this out. I want to talk now a little bit about this overall workflow. So on the Leganto side, again, the interface that your instructors are using, Leganto is a great tool for identifying, you know, which resources are used in courses. What are faculty using, and in which, what are instructors using, and in which courses? Have they been, you know, tagged as essential? How are the resources actually going to be used in the course? Are they tagged as essential? Is it the full resource or only a single chapter? Is it something that is, you know, not actually a whole book, but one chapter? And by the way, it's not even required reading. You have from Leganto all of that contextual information about, you know, what's being used and how it's used. The other thing that Leganto does is automatically include the details of your existing library inventory. So you can see, you know, of this, everybody can see of this citation that the instructor has added, you already have, you know, 3 physical copies or whatever it may be. And then from there, you know, this last piece is really sort of the shift from the end of the workflow. From Leganto, the instructor could potentially, you know, inform the acquisitions team of a course-related purchasing need. We'll talk some about how you could do this, but for example, they could tag something for purchase. Instructors could tag something for purchase, or the library could potentially tag something for purchase if you are building lists in Leganto. So again, some of this could be happening in ALMA, but definitely could be happening in Leganto as well. And then from there, the next steps are happening in ALMA for sure. So, you know, once you have decided that something is a candidate for purchase, you know, reviewing those different requests to see, you know, which ones you might actually be able to purchase, which ones might be, you know, available for the library to purchase within your budget, and so on. You can also, you know, do that with that context that we talked about from before. Which course is this used for? How many students are part of that course? How does this align with our existing collection? And then from there, actually make the purchase. And I don't have a little box around this one. This, you know, process of making the purchase could potentially happen within ALMA. It could happen on a vendor's website. However you make the purchase, at some point you do. And then the last step here, of course, is that you want your students to be able to access those resources. So you want to make sure that the new reading list includes that new inventory that you have acquired. So this is like the overall look at the purchasing workflow as we will be looking at it today. These are kind of the pieces that we'll be looking at. You'll notice this purchase is just very quick. I know that there's a ton of work or steps potentially that might happen as part of that purchase, but that's not going to be the focus of this session today. It's more about the communication across these different systems. So let's look now at the manual purchase request process. And I'm actually going to do a demo for this one so that you can see what this looks like in ALMA. I have, Jenny, let me know. I assume you can see my ALMA here. Is that right?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, perfect. So I'll actually walk through this, you know, as if the instructor has already built the reading list, added all of their items. I'm going to look for a specific reading list here. So as the person, you know, reviewing this reading list, I can see all of the resources that the professor added to the list for their course. And from there, I can understand which resources, you know, require us to purchase them. I want to, let's see if I can do this by last created here, because there's one that here we go. This is the one that I want to look at today, this Think Again. I'll give you a little book recommendation as well. I actually just finished this book and I thought it was really interesting. It's about rethinking your own assumptions about things or things that you think you already know. So I thought that was a really interesting book in general. But this is one that my hypothetical instructor added to our reading list yesterday. You can see here that the hypothetical instructor added this from Amazon using the Cite It tool. And all of the information that's part of this citation, just so you know, is actually coming from the Cite It tool. This is how I added it when I set it up yesterday. And we can also see here that we don't already have any available inventory for this item. So as the person reviewing this reading list, I can identify that this is potentially a candidate for purchase. It's part of this essential reading section of the reading list. I can see all of that information and from there decide that we might want to purchase this one. And the purchase request workflow here is really that process of saying, here's an item on a reading list that we should consider purchasing. It may be that we can't get it. It may be that someone decides it doesn't align with our collection development policy. There may be reasons that we don't end up purchasing it in the end. But here I'm just identifying that this is something that we should look into purchasing. So here it is now walking through creating the purchase request. So I'll talk through some of what we're seeing here. First of all, we're using this record. This existing record is actually coming from the citation metadata, and in this case, coming from the Amazon record. Via Cite It is what's pulling in this information. If I need to change that, I can. I can go to create new record. I could edit any of this information. I don't know, maybe for whatever reason we want actually a different ISBN or something like that. I could make changes here. I could change this to electronic if I want to do that. You can also set that as your default, that it's electronic purchases instead. Down here below, we can see more information about this. Actually, information I wasn't expecting to see. So something different has happened here. The requester that we should be seeing here is actually the professor. Oh no, actually me. I should be the requester here. I think Kevin may have done some of this in preparation, perhaps for today's session. So I'll talk around that a little bit. So this is actually Kevin who was going to do this, but I would expect the requester to be me, the library operator who is submitting this purchase request. And then from here, generally, the rest of this would be blank, just so you know. I happen to have acquisitions roles on my account, so I could potentially fill in all of these details if I knew the information or wanted to fill it in at this point, but you don't have to. I'll scroll down here. The other thing that we can see is this note. This is a configuration option. You have the option to have this note filled in automatically based on the information coming from the course information. You can see here it has the course details, the instructor details, the number of students in the course, the number of existing copies. All of this is also down here below in a structured way, which I think personally I find easier to read and easier to navigate. But what I like about this note is that it also includes that source URL. So if you get a lot of resources that your library doesn't have, it's quite possible those are coming in through the Cite It tool, that your instructors have found them somewhere else and added them with Cite It. So this can be a really nice asset as part of the purchase request, because I could actually go here and get maybe some additional information. Maybe from this information here, I can't quite tell, X, Y, and Z, whatever it may be. I can't quite tell, what this is. So you always, you could potentially add this in here automatically, and then it would show me, where this came from. So if I needed to go and get more information about the resource itself, I could potentially do that. But like I said, this is just a configuration option. You can have this note come in like this automatically, or otherwise it could be blank and I could add in my own note. So maybe I could say something like, the instructor called me and says it's very critical that we get this, or something like that. I could add in additional notes here as well. But down here below also, I mentioned this is the course information. You can see here the number of total copies that you already have. If there's a tag on the citation, that will come in here. And then this created automatically by rule. This is actually relevant for the automatic purchase request, which we'll get to in a few minutes. But I'll point out here that this is something that you can see from here. So this is what is built here, this is all built automatically. All that I did here was just add in the instructor comment, but everything else here is just filled in automatically for us. And I can click Save, which submits the purchase request. So from here, the idea of the workflow is that I am the person reviewing the reading list. I'm kind of walking through this list, identifying these different candidates for purchase, placing that purchase request. You can always see the status. So now that I have submitted the purchase request, I have a new alert here, who submitted this request, when they did it. When this purchase request gets either approved or declined, I'll also see a new alert letting me know that, so you can kind of track the status from here. But if we think now about me being a different person, so now I'm no longer the person who's reviewing the reading list, or maybe I'm still the same person, but I'm kind of moving into wearing a different hat within the library. What's happened with this purchase request is it goes into this task list for acquisitions, for purchase requests to review. And it goes into the unassigned queue like other tasks in Alma. And here we can see all of the purchase requests that are currently in my system. This one here, number 2, is the one that we just submitted together. But before we dig into that, I will point out also some of the facets over here that are relevant. So basically from my mouse down, all of these facets are related to the Leganto data. So I can see, I could filter to the ones that are specifically coming from a reading list. Maybe you think of those as rush orders because you know that there is some urgency to get them ready before the beginning of the term. We could filter by processing department if you have different processing departments. Academic department, maybe I only review purchase requests for the social sciences courses. You could filter by year. You may not have as old of purchase requests as we have in our demo site here, but also by term and also by tag. So if you wanted to maybe filter to the most essential readings first, you can do that. So if you have a lot of purchase requests in this queue here, there's different ways that you can kind of narrow this down to get to the ones that you're looking for. I want to focus on just this one here, but we'll go in and take a look at it. So now we can see again all of the details. Again, in this case, this came from Cite-It. If I, as the acquisitions person, maybe look at this and say, well, we actually want to get a different ISBN, I'll just keep using that example. I can do this create new record. When I submitted the purchase request, it actually created a bib record based on the data that was in the citation. So what I'm doing right now is essentially changing that bib record. In this case, this wasn't something that already exists in our system. So when I change that bib record, it will delete the kind of one that was created for, I don't know, 2 minutes, and it'll create a new one. But that means I can change this information. So if I wanted to get the second edition of this book, instead I could do that. If it was a different scenario, let's say I already had a copy of this book and now I'm going to get the second edition, it wouldn't delete the old bib record. It would just link my purchase request to a new bib record or create a new bib record, based on my new purchase request. But I just want to point that out, that you do have these options here. If you are in a situation where you need to change the metadata associated with a request, you can do that. You can open this form up for editing by changing that. I'm not actually going to change anything here. We still have all of the same information that we had before. Now I am, our hypothetical acquisitions person, so we'll say that I have the right roles to fill in some of this. I can fill in this whole form if I, need to or want to. I can also leave some of these blank. Maybe I am, approving this and someone else is going to actually do the purchase for it. You have some different options there, but I can review this purchase request with all this additional contextual information. We today know that this came from a course, but in our, hypothetical scenario, it would be good for me to know as the acquisitions person that this is, required in this course. If it had a certain tag, how many students are in the course, what inventory we already have. So the purchase request data shows that, it shows that data to the person who is then, reviewing the purchase. I'm going to go ahead and just hit save. I didn't fill in all of the information about this this request, but what's happened now is it has, oh, I haven't actually done it yet. It updated it. I hypothetically changed the citation information, which is what that little pop-up over there was saying. But what I could do here, I'll show you these options, is I could approve an order if I think this is something that we should get. I can reject this if it's something that either we can't get or won't get. I can also send a query to the requester. In this case, you'll recall that the requester is the person managing the reading list. That's who's actually requested this item. I can assign it to somebody else. I can release the assignment, all these things. I'm going to go ahead and do this approve and order. And let's see. Now here's what we get is the notification that the PO line was created. I can actually go here. I can take a look at the PO line, see the details of that PO line. I, again, have permission to do this. I could also edit this PO line if I needed to. So the end of the purchase request process, reviewing that purchase request, the end of that process is that we have created a PO line. So from there, it kind of moves into the regular acquisitions process in Alma. Again, I'm not going to go into this piece, but if we go back to our reading list, I will show you that the other thing that's happened is we now have a new alert on our citation showing me that the purchase request was approved. And the other thing that's happened is this MMS ID. So I don't think I pointed this out, but previously we actually didn't have an MMS ID for this one. It was just a citation that came in from Cited. Now the purchase request process has created that bib record and linked our purchase request to that bib record. So that's the other thing that happened as a part of this process. Okay, so that is all the demo that you're going to get here. But I hope that that gave you kind of an idea, especially if you've never seen this workflow, of how that purchase request workflow kind of works and moves this process throughout the different people potentially, or the different departments that might be part of the purchasing process for these course materials. So that is, let's see, here's my slides. So that is the demo of the manual purchase request workflow. Before we go on and move into automatic purchase requests, I do want to point out that you might not see this option that I had to place a purchase request. This is not actually turned on by default. By default, course reserves operators and course reserves managers don't have this option to submit a purchase request from the reading list. But if you want to do this, just open a support ticket. It's something that we can turn on for you. People who have acquisitions roles will see this option. So if you have permission to create purchase requests generally, you can create them from reading lists. But if you don't have any of those acquisitions roles, you probably don't see this unless you've asked to have it turned on. So just a heads up if you're trying to walk through this in your own system. Okay, so that's the manual purchase request, meaning that I, as the human being, review the reading list and submit the purchase request. There's also the option to have an automatic purchase request created. So in this case, you set up the system so that based on certain conditions, a purchase request is essentially placed behind the scenes. So in other words, I, as the person who's reviewing the reading list, I don't have to submit it. I don't have to look at this list and say this one, this one, this one. Instead, it gets submitted behind the scenes. And when I look at the list, I see those alerts letting me know that a request has been placed automatically. And I say based on certain conditions. So I have a couple of examples here of how you might think about using automatic purchase requests and looking at this from a workflow perspective. So I think there's 3 different examples in these slides that we'll kind of talk through. So the first one is that, again, these are just examples. They may not all be relevant for the way that you actually manage reading lists or do your purchases, but hopefully they'll give you an idea of the types of things that you can do. So the first one here is that you have a scenario where your instructors are specifically requesting that you purchase something. You know, they get to say, please purchase this, please purchase this, please purchase this, essentially. So in this case, the way that you can handle that is with the use of a specific tag. So as part of your training for Leganto, you can say, if you want us to purchase something, please add this purchase tag to the citation. So purchase is just an example, but what you can do is say, you know, we only use this tag in situations where we are going to purchase something. The instructor is asking us to purchase something, or maybe the library is asking us to purchase something. To make the automatic purchase request work, you will set up a citation processing rule, and that triggers these purchase requests. The red text at the top of the screen shows you where to do this, where you would actually set this rule up in Alma. But you can see here the way the rule is structured. So we have the rule name up at the top. We have different input parameters in the middle here. And then we have the request format at the end is electronic. I'm sorry, I'm just going to skip. Yep, okay. I wanted to make sure there weren't any animations in this slide here, that I wasn't missing anything. So what we have in this rule here is a rule that says, if the citation tag is purchase, we want to purchase this. That's quite simple. It is a very simple rule. It's about as simple as you could possibly get with one of these rules. You can definitely make them much more complex. And I'll say in real life, you probably want a rule that is much more complex than this, because maybe you already have a copy of this book and you don't actually want to purchase it. But we'll sort of leave that aside for now. But this is kind of the structure of the automatic purchase request rules. Is you set up the conditions around when the rule will be applied. I'll point out that I think it's also a good idea to set a good name here for your rules, because if you recall, when you look at the purchase request itself, there was that section at the bottom that says created automatically by rule. So this can be a good way to share a little bit of additional information with your acquisitions folks, is by giving this a good rule, so we know maybe the context around why this specific purchase request was created. So that's just something to point out here. So this is just an example of a workflow. Essentially, we say our instructors are allowed to request that we purchase something. To do that, we ask them to add this purchase tag. Anytime the purchase tag is added, it automatically places a purchase request. From there, it kind of bypasses that manual step that I did, where I reviewed the reading list and placed the purchase request. Instead, it goes directly to the acquisitions team as part of that purchase request queue. They would be able to see all of the item details. They'd see all of the course information, all the same information that we just saw as part of the manual purchase request. You can see. So we're just skipping that step of, you know, needing to review this manually. We know we want to try to purchase anything that's been tagged as purchase, and therefore it goes directly into that next queue. Of course, you may still not purchase it. It may be something that doesn't fit with your policies or things like that, but acquisitions is then aware that there's a request to add this and can make the appropriate evaluation. So another scenario, maybe at your institution, rather than instructors being the one to make the request, library staff are the ones who are making the decisions about what to purchase. Instructors add their items to the list, but you at the library already know your collection development policy. You know which types of resources you purchase. You know your requirements for, you know, different types of resources. So for example, here, in this case, you want to make it so that the library reviews all resources which are tagged as essential. You know, this is just an example, but if you know that you want to own all resources that have been tagged as essential, then you can start with that. So same process. To do this, we would create a rule based on, this one will be a little bit more complex, but based on the existing inventory. We don't want to purchase things that we already have, or we don't need to purchase things that we already have, let's say. You can also add in additional details as well. You don't have to do this, but there's additional options. You can do it based on material type. You can have rules based on the number of students who are enrolled in the course. You could say, you know, if we have something, if we don't have something available electronically and it's a book and it's been tagged as essential, then that's something that we want to purchase. So in this case, it's not the instructor who's sort of telling you what to purchase. It's the instructor who is telling you what they need in their course, and then you're kind of taking your own policies and attaching them to that. So this is just a different example. I mentioned this already, but the name of the rule displays on the purchase request. And here we can see a sample rule for this one. This is also not all that complicated, but tagged as essential, no electronic copy. We can see here available on electronic equals no. We don't already have electronic inventory for this, and it's been tagged as essential. So we want to place a purchase request for it. Your input parameters here are combined with an and, a Boolean and. So both of these conditions have to be met to trigger the rule. Here's another option that kind of could be used as well. So this is one where we don't have this available electronic. We do actually have it in our repository. So we have a physical copy of this one, not an electronic copy. We have greater than 9 students in the course. I mentioned that you can include this as an option as well. So in this case, we have a different title in stock, but not electronic. So you can have different rules here. Here's the third one, kind of aligning with the same workflow. Available in electronic is no, it's tagged as essential. Here's one where we also have an item to student ratio. If we're saying we, you know, we don't have an electronic, but maybe we have it in physical, but not enough physical copies for the number of students in the course. So this is 1 item per 20 students. This is what we're looking at here. So you can see the title, essential, no E, fewer than 1 copy per 20 students. Again, that title, that rule name shows up on the purchase request. But hopefully this is kind of giving you an idea of how you can build together these rules that kind of align with how you end up making purchases. If you're going to try to purchase every item that falls within, you know, this particular set of guidelines, you don't need to go in manually and review all of the citations and just check if it's tagged as essential and you don't already have electronic and there's X number of copies per 20 students. You can have the system do that for you. You as the person reviewing the reading list would see that a purchase request had been submitted. You would see that alert. It automatically goes into the acquisitions queue. So that's the idea behind the automatic purchase request workflows is if you have situations where you're always going to try to purchase something, you might as well just do it automatically here. So the third scenario is slightly different and also the same. So this is one where maybe you want to ask the instructor what they want to do. When they add certain types of resources to their list, what do they want to do with them? So for this one, you can leverage the Leganto questions feature to get more information from the instructor. So for example, you could say that the instructor, every time the instructor adds a book, or every time they add a book that the library doesn't have, you want a certain question to pop up saying that, you know, asking the instructor what they would like to do with this resource. And then depending on the answer that they give, you can add a tag. And then you can have a rule that's triggered by that tag, like the other scenarios that we have already talked about. So I'll talk through this a little bit more. So you could say, for example, anytime that the instructor adds a physical item to the book or to the list, you ask this question: what would you like the library to do with this resource? And you provide a certain set of options here. This is probably not the best screenshot because our scenario here is that the instructor has said purchase an ebook. There we go. So purchase an ebook. So if the instructor, you know, is saying, you know what, I'd really like this, then it adds that purchase tag, and then from here trigger the rule. So this is actually the first rule that I showed you, but instead of kind of training your instructors to add that purchase request, you are actually asking them what you should do in certain circumstances. So those are just a couple of different ways to think about automatic purchase requests in terms of how you might work with your instructors today, and also how you make purchasing decisions at your library. You can also use manual purchase requests and automatic purchase requests together. So you could have a few, very specific rules set up for automatic purchase requests so that it only happens in very controlled situations, but then also have library staff who are checking the other citations on their reading list and maybe deciding, yes, we also want to try to buy this one, and adding those manual purchase requests. So you can have a combination of both of these workflows. Something to keep in mind is, depending on how broad, the more broad your rules are, the more purchase requests you're going to get. So if you have an automatic purchase request that's created anytime an instructor tags something as essential, you're going to have a lot of purchase requests created. So you should really consider, the real rules around, when you actually purchase something, so that you're setting up requests that are kind of what you would do if you are actually reviewing this manually. The ways that you could potentially pull together that combination of data to customize, when these requests will be created. I'll also point out, like with everything in Alma, you can always change your mind. So you can try this, you can set up one rule, you can see how it goes, you can change your rules. You can always do, just kind of start doing this and see how it goes. You can change them at any point. So if you set up these purchase request rules, you're certainly not going to be stuck with them. Okay, so that's automatic and manual purchase requests. I want to mention a few things about patron purchase requests. This is slightly different than what we're talking about today, but also related to what we're talking about here. So having nothing to do with Leganto, Alma in general supports patron purchase requests. You can have the request option appear in your discovery service depending on the display logic rules that you have in place. You don't have to use patron purchase requests for any of the scenarios that I described today. Those requests take place in Leganto, and it is a kind of slightly different process. The request is coming from the existence of a tag, for example, or the existing inventory, as opposed to filling out the patron purchase request form. The other thing about this is that you can potentially have the purchase request option display in Leganto. If you ever want students to be able to request that you purchase something, this would be potentially, I think, the only way that you could do it is by having this purchase request display. I don't recommend it sort of generally, especially for those instructor purchase requests. It doesn't display for everything because it's part of the availability display. And I think also it doesn't give you all the information about the request itself. So if you have a patron initiated purchase request, essentially the patron fills in the details about it, and they can add a request or note field. So our hypothetical instructor could request that the library purchase something, but here they say, something like this: can you buy this for my course? Maybe you'll get more information from that than that. Maybe you won't. Whereas if you're using this sort of course specific purchase request workflow, you get significantly more information about the request itself. So we in the library, reviewing this request, now know that this is part of the course. We know how it's used in the course. We can see the number of students. There's so much more context related to this request to help you make an informed decision about what to purchase. So we are talking about a slightly different workflow here than the patron purchase request, where an individual patron fills out a form about what they want to purchase. Here we're talking about, potentially the same thing. Your instructors could still request purchase, but doing it not from that form, and instead from the existence of a tag, or based on your available inventory. So I hope that's clear. I should have said this in the beginning. I will have time for questions. So I see that there's a couple coming in, but we will also have time for questions. If anything that I'm saying is not clear, please feel free to put a comment in the chat or the Q&A chat, it looks like is where they're coming in. Okay, now that we've talked about purchase requests for 40 minutes, I will also point out that there are some known issues with the purchase request workflow. And I'll talk about a few of them and provide some kind of alternatives based on what other libraries are doing. So that's where these various solutions are coming from. And the first one that I want to talk about is a big one. So when you use Leganto to create the purchase request, either manually or automatically, after the request is approved for ordering, it creates a PO line. However, if you do most of your ordering with an API or through embedded order data, maybe you use the Gobi API, the Oasis API for ordering, that process creates an additional PO line or another PO line. So you now would have two PO lines in your system. They're not linked together. They're not linked to each other. So that'd be a problem, of course. You would have a lot of PO lines that are never actually getting ordered. They don't represent, real inventory. They're just duplicate PO lines. So the way that some libraries handle this is by actually rejecting purchase requests, but setting up a rejection reason that is something like order through Oasis or order through Gobi, so that you are kind of getting this out of the queue. You're still aware of the need to purchase this resource, all of the course information, but you're kind of technically finishing the ALMA process here by rejecting it and then picking up the rest of the process in Gobi or Oasis or wherever it is that you're doing your ordering. So you're not actually creating a PO line. You're performing at that point your regular ordering workflow on whatever platform you're using. But you can do that with specific purchase request reject reasons. You can also then track this to understand, on your side that this actually wasn't rejected. It was something that you ended up purchasing. The other thing to be aware of if you do this is that rejecting a purchase request can potentially send a notification letter to your instructor that says, we didn't purchase this. This is very helpful if you are actually, using the purchase request workflow kind of all the way through. You would want instructors to know which ones you're buying and which ones you're not buying. But in this case, you don't want to tell them that you're rejecting it when you're actually not rejecting it. So you can also set up the purchase request status letter. I'm not going to go through this in detail if this is kind of making your eyes blur. I will say this is slides that you can access after the fact, but you can set it up so that under certain conditions, the letter just won't be sent. And that's what this slide and this one actually kind of talk through doing. So you can say, if we have the reject region of Gobi or whatever the code was for your reject region, you don't want to send this letter. So there are ways to kind of work with the purchase request workflow, work around the purchase request workflow, still using the purchase request as the source of information about what needs to be purchased, but from there kind of stopping and doing your purchasing the way that you would otherwise. The other issue that will come up, and this is actually tied to the first in many ways, if not all ways, is that when you kind of stop the purchase request workflow and order it through an API or embedded order data, the PO line itself is not linked to the citation. If you follow the full purchase request workflow, you have the citation, which creates the bib record, which creates the purchase request, which creates the inventory, or creates the PO line, which creates the inventory. There's a link through the whole process here, and then a link back again as well. So your inventory is then automatically linked back to your citation. But if you break that process in the middle by, for example, rejecting a purchase request and ordering through API, there's no link between the citation and then the inventory that you end up acquiring. So I'll point out you don't have this scenario all the time, but if you are doing ordering through the API or through embedded order data, that's where you can end up not having this connection between the citation and the new inventory that you're acquiring. So for this one, you can run the resource locate. There's different options for the resource locate, but the resource locate process is the process of linking up citations to your library inventory. So you can do this manually on a citation by citation basis. I'll point out you can also now use the manual locate, which is a way to link a citation to a specific known item. So if as part of the kind of automatic resource locate, it's not linking to something maybe that you know exists, you can also search for that item specifically and link it. But that's one by one, which is not the goal with Leganto. So there's also the ability to do this in bulk. There's a job that you can run, which will run the resource locate process against your citations. So if you're doing a lot of purchasing of course materials, I recommend that you run this job regularly, maybe especially at the beginning of the term as you're doing that purchasing, because this will go through all of your citations and attempt to link them up. So if you have a lot of newly acquired inventory, the citations wouldn't have linked to that when they were originally added to the list, but they will as part of this job. So that's how you can handle that in bulk. So that's actually all I have for this issues and challenges and solutions section, I think is what it was called. But it all kind of stems from this same idea of like breaking the purchase request workflow. That can cause some problems in different ways. So here's a couple of options to think about if you still are interested in using Leganto purchase requests, but they don't work for you, for specific reasons. I'm looking at the clock. I'm going to keep this Rialto piece very, very brief. But for those of you who subscribe to Rialto, you'll remember this slide from before where I said the purchasing happens somewhere. If you have Rialto, the purchasing can actually happen in Rialto, which is inside of Alma. So it can help close this loop because the ordering is now completely integrated into Alma and the information is shared across the system. So from the purchase request, you can review the potential offers that you could purchase. You could make the purchase right in Rialto. When the resource is acquired, it can automatically notify course reserve staff, automatically update the reading list with new inventory. I'm not going to spend any more time on this because I know that many of you don't use Rialto. There's a video as part of the resources section at the end. I wanted to point out that we also do have plans to integrate with Rialto in a different way later this year that won't go through the purchase request workflow. That's maybe not relevant for our session today, which is more about the purchase request workflow, but actually it's relevant to purchasing in general. So if you have gotten to this point in the session, or maybe this point in your life with Leganto and decided that purchase requests are not a good fit for you, I'll talk about a few additional options. So here it is probably relevant that we're going to be building out a different integration with Rialto where from the citation itself, you'll be able to search Rialto. So kind of skipping that step of the purchase request. This is on our roadmap for later this year. I'm not going to talk about it more, but if you're interested, I can share additional details after the session. So a couple of other options if you don't end up doing purchase requests, you'll need some way for instructors or somebody to notify the acquisitions team that a resource is on a reading list and might be a good candidate for purchase. So for this, you have two different options that I'm going to talk about, which is that you can use tags or custom citation statuses as a way to mark citations that are requiring purchase. So these are two different ways to indicate on the citation that something is desired. Which one should you use depends on who is the person in your institution who's actually marking that citation and when the work is happening, because it is easier to change the citation status If you're working in Alma, you can check the checkbox for many citations at once and then change the citation status. You can set up a custom status, something like review for purchase, or whatever makes sense for you. On the other hand, it's easier to add tags if you're working in Leganto. So if you're doing the work in Leganto, you don't have the option to select a specific status for citations, but it's very easy to add tags. You can even select multiple citations and add the tags to them in bulk. So once you have a way to designate that a citation needs to be reviewed for purchase, you also need a way for the acquisitions team to understand that there are candidates for purchase here. So there's a couple of options with this. The first is that in Alma, they could take a look at the citation task list and filter to either the citation status that you have set up or the tag that you set up, and there see a list of all of the citations that need to be purchased or should be reviewed. And the other option is to use analytics. So in analytics, you could create a report that could then be shared with acquisitions or even shared automatically on a scheduled basis that indicates which resources have either that custom citation status or the tag that you selected. So just going through an example, I'll go through this pretty quickly, but again, you'll have the slides after. So you can build a report that I think I just talked about this, has certain citations with a certain status or a certain tag. You can set this up to run as a scheduled report. You can either say who is going to receive a scheduled report, or acquisition staff can, choose to subscribe to the report. There's different options for that. The thing to remember here, I think the biggest thing to remember, is that the data in analytics is only up to date for the previous day. So if you're thinking about this, you want to think about how urgently your acquisitions process works from course materials. If you flag a citation for purchase today, then the analytics report, tomorrow will have your information in it. So potentially a day's delay that may or may not matter for your specific workflows, but definitely something to be aware of here. Here we have a sample report. You'll have this in the slides. I won't go through this. I'm actually going to skip all of this. Something that's in here, just so you know, is that there's actually a permalink as part of this sample report. So there's some instructions in here about how you can set up a report to use permalinks. This could be very helpful for acquisitions. Maybe they want to be able to go quickly to the citation in Leganto and see additional details about it. So this can be a way to make that process of going from your Excel report to the citations themselves, just in case you might need to look up more information about that item. So this is just instructions. I'm not going to talk through it, but if you're interested, you'll have this. This is all still instructions, still instructions. All right. So I did manage to save time for questions. You could probably tell I was starting to talk a little bit faster at the end there. This is the end of what is prepared. I'll point out there's some additional resources available to you from Ex Libris. We have our campus engagement team that is here to help you with outreach related to Leganto. We also have the premium services, which is a way to get suggestions for workflow optimization, help with configuring Leganto. For a fee, they can do any kind of customized Leganto training or assistance that you may need. So we have contact details in here. We also have the additional resources that I mentioned. So there's a number of links for some of the things that I talked about today. If you want more information about any of these pieces, you can see that in the slides here. The session for next month is going to be on actionable analytics. So we'll look at some sample analytics reports. We'll talk about how you can leverage that data and take action at your institution. So what can you actually do with your Leganto data? How can you share this information with additional people? So this is scheduled for next month, the 16th. And now I will stop. And I did see questions coming into the chat, so give me just a minute here to take a look. Okay. So my first question is, how did the academic department facet get assigned? Let me actually go, I'm still sharing. Let me share, I think we're still here. So when I created a purchase request, it was automatically, not automatically, but some of them may have an academic department associated with them. This is actually coming from the course record. So the course record might potentially include the information about which academic department this course is associated with. Here it is on the course record. So that's where that's coming from. If you have academic departments on your course records, then it can automatically become part of the purchase request. And I just realized that Jenny actually already answered that. So thank you, Jenny.
I got that one right. I was
You
worried.
got it right. You passed. Okay, there's another one here. Can parameter include availability of physical copy on or off shelf? This was also, I suspect, about when we talked about your existing, on the automatic purchase request, you can talk about the existing inventory, whether or not your library has existing inventory for something. One of the options is, let me just open one of these up so that we can see what's in here. So add parameter. So there's options for available and electronic, in repository. So no, it is not as specific as like in repository and also available. It's just in repository. And I can see here that Jenny also added in a link to the Idea Exchange. Yes, the Idea Exchange is a great place for this. We do also have a couple of things on our roadmap for related to purchasing for the next, it's the 2022-23 roadmap. Just so you're aware, there's a couple of things related to purchasing on there. Let me actually, oops, that's not how you spell it. Hopefully it'll work. I think I can put a link to this in the chat as well. I suspect if you're in this session, you're probably interested in what might be on the roadmap, but I know there's a section about purchasing. It's things like adding the demand and other lists information to different places. This is not what I'm trying to do. I can't talk and copy links at the same time, apparently. I'll put this in the chat so you can access this if you're interested. There's also, I think, a number of ideas on the Ideas Exchange that are related to purchasing, but I'm not aware that this one is already on the Ideas Exchange. I haven't heard about this one. So that's a good one to add there, I think. All right. You still with me? I feel like I jabbered away.
Nope, that was very good, very clear, and I'm glad I got those questions right. I'm not quite I'm not at the level you and Kevin are for this, so.
You'll get there, Ginny, and so will everybody else.
I need to commit.
I'll just say, let me go back here to my slide. I will say the last couple of words, which is thank you so much for joining us today for this session. If you have other questions that you hoped this session would cover, I don't think my email's not in here. I'll put it in the chat. I'm always interested to hear, how people are using Leganto and the questions that you may have. So you're welcome to email me. When you close out of the WebEx session, a survey will pop up, which is just a chance for you to let us know what you thought of the session. We plan to offer this training series again, so we'd really like to hear your feedback on the series and understand if there are things we could improve upon. We really want to make sure that this is helpful to all of you using Leganto. So with that, thank you so much, and I guess we'll talk to you again next month.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you, Jesse. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Bye-bye.